I lost my father in March 2019. The kind of early spring day where the air still bites, but the sun pretends it's warm. People kept telling me I was handling it well, 'cause I didn't fall apart at the funeral, and I went back to work at the plant the following Monday. Truth is, I was only good at one thing back then: showing up and staying quiet. The factory in our town runs on noise. Conveyors, alarms, forklifts, steel on steel. It's constant. It's a place where you can be surrounded by people and still feel like you're underwater. After my shift ended, I'd sit in my truck in the parking lot and just listen to the engine tick as it cooled. Like it was the only honest sound left. My dad was buried at Hillside Memorial, a small cemetery tucked beside Route 14, the highway that cuts through our county like a scar. During the day, you could hear traffic from inside the cemetery semis groaning uphill. Tires hissing on wet pavement, motorcycles in summer. At night, it got worse in a way you wouldn't expect. The highway noise didn't stop. It just became lonelier. Like the road had its own life and didn't care what it ran past. I started visiting him late. Not because I believed in anything. I didn't. I went because I couldn't stand the way people looked at me when I talked about him. Like grief was something you had to perform correctly. At night, nobody asked questions. Nobody tried to fix me. It was just the headstones and the wind and that distant rush of cars. The first few times, I didn't even say much. I'd park along the gravel shoulder, cut the lights, and walk in with my hands in my jacket pockets. Dad's grave sat in the newer section, where the grass was still thin and the headstones all looked too clean. I'd stand there and stare at his name like it didn't belong carved into stone. Sometimes I'd talk under my breath. Not prayers. More like inventory. I should have called more. I should have come by after work. I should have noticed he was getting tired faster. I should have. And then I'd stop, because the words didn't help. They just made my throat hurt. About a month into it, I noticed a small thing. A sound my dad had this habit when he was about to say something serious. He'd clear his throat, one sharp little ahem, like he was calling the room to attention. I can still hear it if I close my eyes. He did it at the kitchen table on the porch, even when he was just getting ready to tell me to take out the trash. It wasn't about the trash. It was about control. About making sure you were listening. The first time I heard it at the cemetery, I told myself it was the highway. A truck downshifting. A bird. Anything. But it was too close. Right behind me, I froze with my hands shoved deep in my pockets, staring at his headstone. The grass around his grave moved a little in the breeze. That was it. Then I heard it again, a clean, familiar throat clear. 2 feet behind my shoulder. I didn't turn around at first. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me believed that if I didn't look, it wasn't real. Or maybe because I already knew what I would see nothing in that would be worse, somehow. Dad. I whispered, the word came out like steam. It felt stupid the second it left my mouth. From somewhere low, close to the ground, came a voice I hadn't heard since the hospital. Not like that. My blood went cold so fast, my teeth clicked. The voice didn't come from behind me. It didn't come from the highway. It came from the dirt, from the space beneath the stone. Like the earth itself had learned how to talk. I couldn't move. My fingers went numb inside my pockets. I remember staring at his name and thinking, it's just a trick of sound. The wind does weird things. You're tired? You're losing it. The voice sighed another sound I knew by heart. You always called me Pop when you were little, it said. You forgot that? I swallowed so hard it hurt. No one knew that. Not really. My mother had heard it once or twice when I was a kid, but it wasn't something we talked about. It was a small private thing between me and him, back before I learned to act like I didn't need anybody. The grass around the grave lay flat. The stone stood there, steady and ordinary. And the voice waited as if I'd been rude. I I didn't forget, I said, because I didn't know what else to do. That's a lie, it answered, calm and heavy. You forgot plenty. For a few seconds, I stood there shaking, trying to decide if I was having some kind of break. People always talk about grief like it's a storm, like it hits you and you know it's happening. This felt different. This felt like someone had opened a door in my chest and let something cold step inside. The voice didn't yell. It didn't sound angry. It sounded exactly like my father on a quiet evening, when the TV was low and he was thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. You came late, it said. I work, I started. You always have an excuse, it said. And there was that throat clear again, sharp and impatient. You stand there like a stranger. Don't do that. I stared at the dirt. My knees felt weak. I wanted to run back to my truck, slam the door, and drive until the highway turned into something else. But I didn't, because the voice was him. It was him in the way a photo is him, in the way a smell can be him. It had the same rhythm, the same tired edge. Why are you doing this? I asked. A pause, and then, softer, because you're finally here. That should have made me feel something warm. It didn't. It made my skin prickle. I left not long after. I didn't say goodbye. I walked backward at first, like the grave might lunge at me. In my truck, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing hard, staring at the cemetery gate in my rearview mirror. The highway kept rushing by, indifferent as ever, and my dad's voice followed me all the way to town inside my head. I told myself I wasn't going back. I lasted 3 nights. On the 4th night, I found myself turning off Route 14 like my body had decided for me. I parked in the same spot, walked the same path, stood in the same place. This time, the voice didn't wait. You were always stubborn, it said from the dirt. Just like your mother. I shouldn't be here, I said. No, it agreed. But you are. I made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't come out so broken. This isn't possible. Neither was your job, it said. You were never meant to stay there. That hit me in a different way, because my father used to say that. Not those exact words, but the idea. He hated the plant. Hated the way it chewed people up and made them old before their time. He wanted better for me, and I kept settling anyway. Like settling was a virtue. You're not him, I said suddenly, because I needed to push back. You just sound like him. The silence after that felt thick, like I'd insulted something that had been pretending to be polite. Then, if I'm not him, prove it. How? Another throat clear, impatient, familiar. Dig. I actually took a step back. My boots scuffed the grass. What? Just a little, the voice said, almost gentle. You know they didn't put me right. You know it. I watched them, I said, louder than I meant to. I watched them lower the casket. I watched them cover it. You watched, it repeated, and somehow the words sounded like an accusation. You didn't check. I stood there with my heart pounding so hard it made me dizzy. The highway hissed and roared behind the trees. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and stopped. Why would I dig? I said, my voice shaking. That's sick, is it? The voice asked. Or is it love? That was the first time it used that word, love, like a tool. I left again. I went home and sat in my kitchen with the lights on until the sun came up. I drank water, then coffee, then nothing. I didn't sleep. Every time the refrigerator clicked on, my muscles jumped. That day at work, the noise felt sharper. People's laughter sounded fake. When someone cleared their throat behind me on the line, I almost swung around and hit them. I didn't tell anyone. You don't tell people your dead father is talking to you from a grave by the highway. They don't pat you on the back and say, "That's rough, man." They call doctors. They call your mom. They call the cops if they think you're going to do something stupid. So I stayed quiet. And at night, like an idiot, I kept going back each visit. The voice got more comfortable. It started correcting me on details, the way my father used to. If I mentioned a fishing trip, it would say, that was 2007, not 2006. If I talked about the old dog we had, it would remind me, her name was Daisy, not Maisie. Small things, but precise. It felt like proof. It felt like a hand reaching out of the dark. But every time, I tried to steer the conversation toward anything real. Why are you here? What do you want? Are you at peace? It would circle back to the same thing. Dig. Sometimes it would soften its tone, like it knew how scared I was. I'm cold, it would say. You can fix it. Other times, it would get mean. You let me die, it said one night, and my stomach flipped. You let me go in there alone? You were in the hospital, I choked out. I was there. You were there when it was easy, it answered. Where were you the years before? Where were you when I needed help in the garage? Where were you when the roof leaked? You were busy being a man who thinks he has time. I stood there, gripping the edge of his headstone so hard, my fingers hurt. My eyes burned. I wanted to scream that I did my best, that I didn't know how to be the son he wanted, that I loved him even when I was failing. The voice waited and then said quietly, "Prove it." I started bringing a small shovel in the back of my truck. I told myself it was just in case I got stuck in mud. I told myself it wasn't for the grave the first time I brought it. The voice grew almost pleased. "There you go," it said. "Now we can talk like men." My hands shook so badly I could hardly hold the handle. I stood there staring at the patch of earth, fresh sod laid over it. The grass still not fully rooted. "You don't have to," the voice said, and that almost made it worse. "But you will." I drove home without digging. I drove home every night without digging. But the shovel stayed in the truck like a promise I couldn't take back. Then, one night in late June, I heard the throat clear somewhere else. I was half asleep on my couch. TV on low when it came from the hallway. Sharp and familiar. I sat up so fast my neck popped. The house was dark except for the blue TV glow. My front door was locked. I lived alone. No pets. No roommates. The sound came again, closer, like someone standing just out of sight. "Hello?" I called, and my voice sounded thin. Silence. I got up, turned on the hallway light. Nothing, empty carpet. Closed bathroom door. My bedroom door slightly ajar like always. I told myself it was pipes. Old house. Weird noises. But the sound was too clean, too human. When I went back to the couch, the TV volume had dropped by itself, as if someone had reached over and turned it down. I stared at the remote in my hand, my thumb nowhere near the buttons. That night, I slept with every light on. The next day at work, I kept hearing things that weren't there. A throat clear in the break room. A sigh behind the lockers. A voice almost forming words in the steady hiss of the air compressor. By the time my shift ended, I felt like I was carrying a live wire under my skin. I drove straight to the cemetery. I didn't even shut my truck off right away. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the dark gate, and said out loud, "You can't come to my house." No answer. Only the highway. When I finally walked to his grave, the air felt different, heavier. The tree line seemed closer than usual, like it had leaned in. "You heard me," I said, standing over the stone. "You can't do that." The throat clear came from beneath the dirt, impatient like a man interrupted. "You're mine," the voice said. My mouth went dry. "No. You carry my name," it said. "You carry my blood. You carry my guilt. Don't tell me no. It didn't sound like my father in that moment. It sounded like something using my father's voice, the way a person might wear a coat. The rhythm was his, the tone was his. But there was a hunger underneath it that I had never heard in him alive. I backed up until my legs bumped the next headstone. "What are you?" I whispered a pause that felt like something smiling in the dark. "Dig," it said. I don't remember deciding. I remember my hands moving on their own, walking back to my truck, grabbing the shovel. I remember the weight of it, the cold metal. I remember the sound the blade made when it bit into the ground near my father's headstone. The first scoop of dirt came up easy. Then another. Then the sod peeled back like skin. My breathing turned loud in my ears. The highway noise seemed to fade until it was just me and the hole. "Stop," I said. Not sure if I was talking to myself or to it. "Keep going," the voice breathed. Close now, like it was right behind my ear, even though it still came from the ground. Almost there. The dirt smelled wet and sweet. Worms twisted in the clumps. I kept digging. I don't know how long. My arms burned. My hands blistered. Then the shovel hit something solid wood. My stomach lurched. So hard, I nearly threw up. I stared down into the hole. The flashlight beam shook as I pointed it. The top of a casket. Dark, real. I should have climbed out. I should have covered it back up. I should have driven straight to my mother's house and told her everything and begged her to keep me from doing whatever came next. Instead, I whispered, "Pop." And from the casket, no longer from the dirt, no longer muffled, came a voice as clear as if he were standing beside me. "That's better," it said. My skin went ice cold. The casket lid shifted, not opened, not lifted, just shifted like something inside had pushed up against it, testing it. I stumbled back and fell onto the grass. My flashlight rolled, the beam spinning over headstones, over tree trunks, over the open hole. I heard a sound from down there. A long exhale, a satisfied sigh. "Now," the voice said, and it wasn't my father anymore, not fully. "Let me out." I don't remember getting to my truck. I remember running. I remember my boots slipping on wet grass. I remember my hands fumbling with the keys like they belonged to someone else. I remember the engine coughing to life. As I reversed, my headlights swung across the cemetery, across the headstones, across the open hole by my father's grave. And for one fraction of a second, in the hard white light, I saw a shape sitting up at the edge of the hole, like a man pulling himself out of a ditch. I didn't stay to see the face. I drove until my vision blurred. I drove until my chest hurt. I drove home and shoved furniture against my front door like that would matter. I didn't go back to the cemetery after that. I called in sick for a week. I told my mom I had the flu. I threw the shovel into a dumpster behind a grocery store like it was evidence. But it didn't end. It didn't even slow down. Because once I hit the casket, the voice didn't need the cemetery anymore. It started small. A throat clear from the corner of my bedroom when I turned the lights off. A sigh from the laundry room when I passed by. My name softly spoken from inside the walls. Then it got bolder. One night, as I stood at my kitchen sink washing a cup, I heard the voice directly behind me. "You're not going to leave me again," it said. I spun around so fast, the cup shattered in the sink. The kitchen was empty, but the air felt occupied, like there was someone standing too close, someone you can't see but you can feel. The way you feel a person's body heat in a tight space. I backed away, my hands up without thinking. "I didn't let you out," I whispered. A low chuckle rang heavy came from the dark hallway. "You did," it said. "You opened the way." The worst part isn't the fear. It's the familiarity. The way the voice still sometimes sounds like my father on a good day. The way it uses my childhood nickname like it's tender. The way it makes me want to answer even when every part of me knows I shouldn't. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be lying in bed and I'll hear it clear its throat, patient as ever, and I'll feel the mattress dip slightly at my feet as if someone has sat down. Then it whispers, almost lovingly, "Son, I don't visit Hillside Memorial anymore. I don't drive Route 14 at night. I don't even look toward that part of town if I can help it. But it doesn't matter, because I stopped going to my father's grave, and something else started coming to mine." The first time I went back to Merrill Glen Cemetery alone, I told myself it was for closure. That's what people say when they don't have a better reason for doing something they know they shouldn't do. It was late September, the kind of evening where the air feels thin and cold, even though the sun hasn't fully dropped yet. I'd just come home from campus because I couldn't stand the apartment another night. Couldn't stand the quiet after the breakup. Couldn't stand my phone lighting up with messages I wasn't going to answer. I drove with no music on, hands locked around the steering wheel like I could squeeze the ache out of my chest if I gripped hard enough. Merrill Glen sits behind a line of pines on the edge of town, fenced in with rusted iron that sags like a tired spine. You don't see it from the main road unless you already know where to look. The gate has a chain that's more habit than security. Someone had clipped it at some point and never bothered replacing it. The path inside is cracked asphalt that disappears into weeds and fallen needles. My family has a plot, they're an old one, tucked back where the headstones lean and the names are worn soft. It used to feel like a place of history when I was a kid. I'd follow my sister through the rows, stepping over roots, trying to keep up with her long stride while she told me made-up stories about who haunted which grave. Her name was Nora. She was 7 years older than me, which, when you're 9, is basically ancient and all-knowing. She could braid hair without looking. She could fix a flat tire. She could talk our mother down from a storm. She had that kind of presence that makes a room tilt toward her without anyone noticing. When she died, everything in our house stayed upright, but it felt like the gravity changed. I parked near the gate and walked in with my hoodie pulled tight. The cemetery was quiet in that specific way neglected places get quiet. No birdsong, no distant lawnmower, no voices. Even the wind seemed careful as it moved through the trees. The family plot is marked by a low stone border with a little iron cross someone bolted into the corner decades ago. There are 6 graves back there, including my grandparents, a great-uncle nobody talked about, and Nora. Her headstone is newer than the rest, pale granite with clean edges that haven't had time to wear down. Her name is carved deep, with her dates beneath. I stood in front of it for a long time without doing anything, my throat tight, my hands shoved into my pockets like I was trying to hide from the fact that I was there. Then I did what I always did. I talked to her. It started after the funeral. At first, it was small, stiff sentences updates like I was writing an email. School is fine. Mom is okay. Dad won't talk about you. But over time, it slid back into something familiar. The way you talk when you're alone in a room with someone who knows you better than you know yourself. That evening, I told her everything I hadn't said out loud all week. I told her about the breakup, how Caleb had said he needed space like I was a cluttered closet. How he'd hugged me in the parking lot behind the library and looked over my shoulder. The whole time like he was already walking away. I told her how stupid I felt for crying in front of him. I told her how I kept replaying old conversations, trying to find the moment where I became too much. My voice echoed strange among the stones. It felt wrong to be the only sound. I was wiping my face with the sleeve of my hoodie when I noticed the ground near the base of her headstone was disturbed. A shallow scrape through the layer of pine needles, like something had dragged across it. I crouched and brushed the needles aside with my fingers. The dirt beneath was dark and damp. I told myself it was an animal. a raccoon digging for grubs, a stray dog. Anything that lived and breathed and didn't know what it was doing. But as I stood, I had the sudden, crawling sense that I wasn't alone in the plot anymore. Not in the way you know a person is watching you. In the way you feel a presence, like a shift in pressure, like the air deciding to sit heavier on your shoulders. I turned around, no one, just rows of graves and weeds, and the path back toward the gate. "You still love scaring me," I said. Because it was the only thing I could think to say that didn't sound like fear, I forced a laugh that came out thin. I said goodbye like I always did. I promised I'd be back soon, because lying to the dead is easier than admitting you don't know how to live without them. On the walk back to my car, my shoes made soft, crunching sounds on the needles and gravel. After a few steps, I heard something else, footsteps. At first, I thought it was mine echoing off the stones, a weird acoustic trick. But the rhythm didn't match until I slowed down. When I slowed, it slowed. When I stopped, it stopped. It wasn't behind me like someone following. It was close to place, like it was stitched into my movement. I told myself it was my heartbeat, loud in my ears. I told myself grief does things to perception. I kept walking. The footsteps kept walking. I didn't run. If I ran, it would become real. That's the logic your brain uses when it's trying to hold itself together. I reached the gate, got into my car, and locked the doors with shaking fingers. The interior smelled like old coffee and the strawberry air freshener Nora had shoved into the Q folder months before she died. Laughing because she said my car smelled like a sad attic. I sat there with my hands in my lap and listened. Nothing, no footsteps, no rustle, no tapping on the glass. I started the engine and drove home, telling myself it was over and done, at home. The porch light was out again. The front steps were slick with the day's damp. I went inside, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen for water. My parents were out at a neighbor's. Something about returning a casserole dish, which felt like the most normal thing in the world and therefore impossible. I set my glass down on the counter and froze. There were muddy footprints on the tile, not mine. I'd taken my shoes off at the door and hadn't stepped in anything wet. These prints were darker, damp, the shape of a shoe tread pressed into a thin film of dirt. They came from the hallway that leads to the back door, crossed the kitchen, and stopped. Right outside my bedroom, the last print was half smeared. Like whoever made it had paused there and shifted their weight. I stared at those marks until my eyes stung. Then I did something I can't fully explain without sounding ridiculous. I called out, "Nora." The word came out in a whisper. The house swallowed it. Of course, there was no answer. Of course, there wasn't. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and wiped the footprints up until the tile was clean, scrubbing too hard like I could erase what it meant. When my parents came home, I didn't tell them. I told myself I wouldn't scare them, but the truth is, I was afraid they'd look at me with that careful expression people get when they think you're cracking. That night, I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling. The house settled around me. Pipes creaked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere, a branch tapped the window and made me flinch at around 2 in the morning. I heard someone walk down the hallway. The boards outside my door are old and complain when stepped on. Nora used to know exactly which ones to avoid. She'd sneak into my room when we were younger and sit on the edge of my bed to scare me awake because she thought it was hilarious. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath. Then so soft I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. There was a little familiar sound. A throat clearing. Nora had a habit of doing that before she spoke. When she was trying not to laugh, my skin prickled. My mouth went dry. I waited for my mother's voice, or my father's. I waited for the click of their bedroom door. I waited for some explanation that fit inside the world. Instead, I heard a whisper. M. That was my nickname. Only Nora used it like that, short and sharp, like she was calling me from across a crowded room. My body went so cold, I thought I might be sick. M, the whisper repeated, closer now, as if the voice was leaning toward the crack beneath my door. I stared at the doorknob. I didn't answer. After a long moment, the whisper shifted, almost playful. Hey, remember when you tried to convince Mom that Cat could talk? A laugh fluttered up my throat without permission. That was real. That was something from when I was 6, standing in the living room, holding Mr. Pickles under his armpits like a puppet and making him say ridiculous things until Nora fell over laughing. But the voice added, softer, like a punchline delivered wrong. You made him say, peas are poison. My stomach dropped. It wasn't peas. It was pears. I had been terrified of pears because I'd choked on one once. And Nora, being Norhad, turned it into a joke that made me laugh so hard I forgot to be afraid. It was a small mistake, the kind of mistake you make when you've heard a story secondhand. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, eyes burning. Go away, I whispered, my voice shaking. Silence, then, slow and deliberate, came the soft scrape of something against the floor, as if someone had shifted their feet, as if someone was still out there. I didn't sleep. When morning came, pale and ordinary, I opened my door. Nothing was in the hall, but when I looked down, there was a smear of dried mud along the baseboard, right where the last footprint had been. Over the next few days, I tried to be normal. I went back to campus. I sat through lectures. I pretended my hands weren't trembling every time my phone buzzed. I avoided my bedroom at night by falling asleep on the couch with the TV on low, telling my parents I had a lot on my mind, which was true in the blandest way. The whispers didn't stop. Sometimes they came from the hallway. Sometimes they came from the corner of my room when I couldn't avoid sleeping there. Sometimes I heard them in the bathroom when the shower was running. The words tangled with the sound of water. They always sounded like Nora, but always just slightly wrong. She'd say things we used to say, but the cadence would be off, like someone performing a familiar script without understanding the joke. She'd call me M, but sometimes it came out as M, stretched, like the speaker was tasting the word, and then the photos started changing. It began with one picture in the living room. A framed photo of Nora and me at the county fair, me with cotton candy stuck to my hair. Nora leaning down to whisper something into my ear. Both of us laughing. I walked past it one afternoon and stopped so hard my chest hurt. Nora's hand was on my shoulder. In the real photo, her hand had been behind me, resting on the railing. She'd been leaning in, but not touching now. Her fingers curved over my shoulder like she was gripping me in place. I took the frame off the wall and held it up to the light. It wasn't a trick of angle. It wasn't glare. The hand was there. The fingertips looked sharper than they should have, the nails too pale. My hands started shaking. I went upstairs, dug through boxes in my closet, and found the old photo album my mom keeps. I flipped to the fair pictures, heart pounding. The same image was there, and in that one too. Nora's hand was on my shoulder. I turned pages faster. Vacation photos, Christmas mornings, high school graduation, and every picture where Nora stood near me, she was closer than I remembered. Her arm around my waist when it hadn't been. Her head tilted toward mine like she was pressing in taut in the most recent photo, Nora's last birthday. Taken in our kitchen, she stood behind me with her chin on my shoulder and her smile just a little too wide. I remembered that picture clearly because I'd taken it. Nora hadn't posed like that. She'd been standing across the counter, holding up her slice of cake like a toast. I put the album down and backed away from it like it was a live thing. That night, I tried to lock my bedroom door. The lock clicked, but the door still eased open an inch, as if something on the other side was pulling against it. I pushed it shut harder, checked the latch, and leaned my weight against it until it stayed. From the hallway, the whisper came, "Why are you being mean?" I pressed my hands over my ears. The voice softened, coaxing, like Nora used to sound when I was upset. "It's me. I came home." My throat tightened. Tears slid down my cheeks, hot with anger and grief and something uglier. "You're not her," I said, louder than I meant to. "Stop." Silence fell so suddenly, it felt like the air got sucked out of the room. Then, very gently, came a knock, 1, 2. A pause, like someone waiting for permission. Then 3 quick knocks. The pattern Nora used when she wanted to come in and borrow a shirt without asking. My whole body trembled. I stared at the thin line of darkness beneath the door. Something shifted on the other side, and I heard the softest, wet sound like a bare foot lifting off tile. A breath whispered through the crack. "M," it said, and this time the name sounded perfect. That was the moment I almost opened the door, not because I believed. Not because I thought my sister was standing there, with mud on her shoes and a grin on her face, but because grief is a kind of hunger. And my body didn't care what it was fed, as long as it felt full for a second. My hand moved toward the doorknob, and then the voice said, very softly, like sharing a secret, "Let's go back. Let's dig." I jerked my hand away like I'd been burned. Nora would never say that. I backed up until my spine hit the wall. The whisper continued, patient, pleased, as if it had learned the right thing to say just a little. It murmured, "You already started." I didn't sleep in that room again after that. I started sleeping in the guest room with the door wedged shut using a chair. I started keeping the lights on in the hall all night. I started avoiding mirrors because sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Nora behind me. Standing too close, my parents noticed. They asked me what was wrong. I gave them careful answers. Stress, heartbreak, too much school, too little sleep. I didn't tell them about the footprints, or the whispers, or the photos, because part of me didn't want them to. Say I was imagining it, and part of me didn't want them to confirm it. A week after my visit to the cemetery, I came home late from campus. The house was dark. My parents had gone to bed. I stood in the hallway, staring at my bedroom door. The light from the street lamp outside cut through the window and laid pale bars across the carpet. The air smelled faintly of damp earth. I hadn't been in my room since the last night. I'd avoided even looking at it, but I needed a textbook. I needed my laptop charger. I told myself I could do it quickly. Grab what I needed and get out. I stepped toward the door. The doorknob turned slowly on its own, not a quick twist like a draft or a faulty latch. A deliberate turn, as if someone's hand patient, certain, had wrapped around it from the other side. The door opened a few inches. Darkness spilled out, and from inside my room, my sister's voice whispered, almost laughing, like she'd been waiting there the whole time. "Took you long enough." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering. And I understood something with horrible clarity. It wasn't trying to get into my room. It was already there. It was waiting on the other side of the door. Not to be let out, but to be acknowledged, named, invited into the parts of me that still belonged to Nora. From the crack, the whisper slid out again, softer now, intimate, like a breath against my ear. "M," it said, and it sounded like home. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't run. I just stood there until the doorknob turned back the other way and the door eased shut, as gentle as a parent tucking in a child. After that, I stopped trying to prove anything. I stopped looking at photos. I stopped going near Marrow Glen. I sleep in the guest room now. And I keep a towel wedged along the bottom of the door because I can't stand seeing that thin line of dark hallway. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my parents' breathing is the only normal sound left, I still hear it. Soft footsteps in the hall, a careful throat clearing, and then the whisper right outside the door saying my name in a voice that almost matches my sister's. Like a song you used to know by heart played slightly out of tune. "M," it whispers. And on the other side of the door, something waits, smiling in the dark, getting closer every time I remember her. I'm going to tell this exactly the way it happened, 'cause I'm tired of people turning it into a ghost story with dramatic voices and made-up details. If you've ever worked nights, you'll already know the truth is usually quieter and uglier than anything Hollywood invents. It was late September in 2018, a few days after we buried my grandmother. Rural place, flat farmland, long straight roads, and the kind of cemetery that isn't in town but outside it, pushed back behind a line of trees like someone wanted to hide it from the living. The funeral itself was normal in the way funerals can be normal. Sad faces, paper cups of lukewarm coffee. People saying she lived a good long life, like it's a spell that keeps grief from biting. My grandmother did live a long life. She raised my mother, then half the neighborhood. And she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were both safe and slightly guilty at the same time. I was 42 then, a night security guard for a storage yard and a small equipment lot that sat near a stretch of farmland. It wasn't glamorous. It was me in a reflective vest, a flashlight, a radio that crackled more than it spoke, and a pickup that smelled like old vinyl and stale cigarettes from the guy who worked days. I took that job because it paid steady and because nights were predictable. I liked predictable. Nights didn't ask questions. Nights didn't bring surprise visits from relatives. Nights didn't force you to sit in a church basement and pretend you weren't thinking about the last thing you said to a person who's now under the ground. The last thing I said to my grandmother had been impatient. Not cruel, just impatient. The kind of tone you use when you're tired and you think you have more time than you do. She'd called me on a Tuesday morning while I was trying to get some sleep before my shift. The phone buzzing on the nightstand felt like a hammer against my skull. I answered, half awake, and she asked if I could come by later. "Just for a little bit," she said. "I don't want to be alone today," I told her. "Nana, I've got to sleep. I'll come this weekend." There was a pause, and then she did something she almost never did. She sighed. Not a dramatic sigh, just a small exhale that carried weight. "Okay, honey," she said, and she tried to sound cheerful. This weekend, that was the last time I heard her voice alive. She passed the next afternoon while I was at work. My mother called, sobbing so hard I couldn't understand her words at first. I remember standing in the gravel lot under a bright security light while crickets screamed from the dark grass, thinking, this can't be real. People don't vanish between weekends, but they do. They do it all the time. After the funeral, everybody scattered back to their lives the way they always do. Grief is heavy until you have groceries to buy and bills to pay. My mother stayed with my aunt for a few days. My cousins posted photos on Facebook with long captions about angels. And I went back to work because that's what I knew how to do. My first shift after the funeral was a Friday night. The sky went down early, and the air had that sharp, rural chill that smells like cut hay and damp soil. I drove out to the lot around 10, signed in and did the usual, checked the gate, walked the perimeter, listened for anything out of place. The property I guarded was a long rectangle of chain-link fence, shipping containers, a few storage sheds, and some old equipment tractors, plows, a backhoe that never moved. The cemetery was across the road, maybe 200 yards away, sitting on a slight rise behind a windbreak of cedar trees. From the lot, you could see the cemetery entrance sign, the dirt lane leading in, and rows of headstones faintly lit by moonlight when there was moonlight. That night, there was barely any. The clouds were low and thick, and the only light came from my flashlight and the security lamps hanging on the poles around the yard. Out beyond the fence, the farmland was a black ocean. You could hear animals sometimes, coyotes, an owl. Once in a while, a cow lowing like it was dreaming. I did my first round. Everything quiet, and climbed back into the pickup to warm up. The heater was weak, and the radio on the dashboard played some late-night talk show I didn't care about. I switched it off and sat in the silence, thinking about my grandmother's hands. Old hands, thin skin, veins like blue threads. Those hands had packed my lunch when I was a kid. Those hands had smoothed my hair when I had a fever. Those hands had gripped my wrist once when I was 12 and tried to run into the road after a dog. And she'd yanked me back hard enough to leave bruises. She'd slapped the back of my head and called me by my childhood nickname, the one nobody used anymore. Buddy, she'd say. Don't be a dummy, buddy. My mother hadn't called me buddy since I grew taller than her. My wife didn't call me buddy. Nobody did. I checked my watch. Just after midnight. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of shadow, a shape from the clouds shifting. I was looking out through the windshield toward the cemetery because my eyes tend to drift there at night. Cemeteries do that. They pull your attention like a magnet, especially when you've just put someone you love into one. There was a bench just inside the cemetery gate, the kind they install so people can sit, cry, pray, or rest before walking deeper in. During the day, it looked harmless. At night, it looked like an invitation to get stabbed in a horror movie. Something pale was sitting on it. My brain fought it. My brain always tries to protect me. It started offering explanations like a man in a courtroom. It's a statue. It's a plastic bag caught on the bench. It's a person visiting a grave. But the shape moved. Just slightly. A shift of shoulders. The tilt of a head. I opened the truck door and stepped out into the cold. The air hit my face like a slap. I clicked my flashlight on and aimed it toward the cemetery gate. The beam reached the bench, and the shape became a person. An elderly woman. She was sitting upright, hands folded in her lap, looking straight ahead like she'd been waiting a long time. The light caught the side of her face and made her skin look waxy, almost too smooth. But the posture was real. The body was real. A woman was sitting in the cemetery at midnight. I should have called the sheriff. I should have stayed in the yard. But there's a stupid part of me that still wants to be helpful. Still believes most people are simply lost. I walked toward the fence line closest to the road, my boots crunching gravel. The cemetery was outside my property. Technically not my problem, but a lone old woman out there could be in danger, or sick, or confused. As I got closer, my flashlight beam shook slightly. Not because my hand was weak, because my stomach was tightening. Her dress, it was a dark dress. Long sleeves, a modest collar. The exact style my grandmother wore to church. The exact style my mother picked for the burial. Because Nana would have liked it. It even had the same small, stitched pattern near the cuff, something my grandmother had done herself on an old Singer sewing machine. I stopped walking. The woman turned her head slowly and looked directly at me. My mouth went dry so fast, my tongue felt glued to the roof. It was her, not a stranger who resembled her. Not an old woman who happened to wear a similar dress. Her face was my grandmother's face, the way I remembered it when I was a kid, softer, fuller, less sunken than it was at the end. Her hair was done neatly back, the way she always did it for Sunday. And her eyes are those eyes that made you feel safe and guilty locked on mine. She smiled, and then she spoke. Buddy, she said, like she was calling me from the porch to come in for dinner. come here." No one else in the world said that word to me. Not anymore. I took a step without meaning to. My body moved before my mind could argue. "Nana?" I whispered, and I hated myself the moment I said it. I hated how desperate it sounded. I hated that I wanted it to be true. Her smile faded into something else. Something wounded. "Why'd you leave me alone?" She asked. The words hit me like a fist. Not because they were scary. Because they were exactly the kind of thing grief whispers at you when you're trying to sleep. "Why didn't you go? Why did you say this weekend like you owned time?" "I didn't," I tried to say. My voice came out rough. "Nana, you—" She lifted one hand. Her fingers curled slowly, beckoning. "Come," she said again. "It's cold." I stared at the cemetery gate. Between me and her was the road, empty, silent. I could have stayed where I was. I could have turned around and locked myself inside the truck like a rational man, but I stepped off the gravel and onto the road. Halfway across, my radio crackled. At first, it was just static. Then a burst of sound like someone bumping the mic. I instinctively reached for the radio clipped to my vest and pressed the button. "Unit 7, I said, using the call sign they'd assigned me. "Go ahead." There was no reply, just a hiss. Then, faintly, a woman's voice distorted through the speaker, like an old recording. "Buddy?" I froze mid-step. The voice wasn't from the cemetery anymore. It was in my hand. I stared down at the radio like it was a snake. The speaker crackled again. "Buddy, come here." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I looked up at the bench. The woman was still there, watching me, waiting. My flashlight beam jittered across her face. Her expression had changed. It wasn't a smile now. It was expectation. Like she knew I would come, because she'd always known how to make me come when she called. My mind snapped into something like survival mode. I took another step, then another, like I was walking in a dream. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. But my legs didn't care what my mind thought. I reached the cemetery gate. The chain across it was loose, secured by a simple latch. People came and went. It wasn't locked unless there'd been vandalism. I lifted it. The metal cold and damp, and stepped inside. The air felt different. That sounds stupid, but it's true. Cemeteries have their own temperature, their own smell. The grass inside was shorter, clipped. The soil felt heavier under my boots. My flashlight beam made the headstones flash white for a second as I moved. The bench was maybe 20 feet in. She sat perfectly still. "Nana?" I said again. And the word felt wrong in my mouth, like a child calling out in a store. She looked at me with those eyes. "You didn't come," she said. I waited. My chest burned. "I'm sorry," I blurted out. I was tired. I thought her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You always were tired." That sounded like her. That sounded like the way she teased me when I was a teenager. When I'd flop on her couch after school and complain about homework, like I was the only kid in the world with problems. For a second, I felt something that wasn't fear. Relief, because grief is so hungry it will eat poison if it tastes like comfort. I took another step toward her, and that's when I noticed something. Her shoes were clean. The cemetery lane was dirt. The ground was damp from earlier rain. If she'd walked in, her shoes would have mud. But the shoes under her dress were spotless, polished like church shoes. I stopped again, her head tilted slightly, like she could sense my hesitation. "Buddy," she said softly, "don't be difficult." The radio in my hand crackled, and her voice came through it at the same time, layered over itself like a delayed echo. "Don't be difficult." I looked down at the radio. My thumb hovered over the push-to-talk button. My coworkers were on a shared channel. If anyone was speaking, I'd hear them. The only person on duty besides me that night was Paul, another guard, but he was assigned to a different property 10 miles away. This wasn't someone playing a prank. Nobody had my grandmother's voice. Nobody even knew that nickname. I swallowed. "How are you here?" I asked. "We buried you." Her eyes narrowed, and in that small movement, something in her face changed. The softness slipped. The skin around her mouth tightened. "Buried me," she repeated, like the word offended her. "You put me under the dirt like a dog." My stomach turned. My grandmother would never say that. She loved dogs. She'd cried when her old beagle died. I backed up half a step. Her gaze followed me. "I don't like it down there," she said. Her tone was still calm, but there was a sharpness underneath, like metal under cloth. "It's lonely." The radio crackled again. Lonely. My breath came faster. "Nana, stop," I said, without thinking, like I could order reality around. "Stop it." Her head lifted slightly, and for a second, I saw something wrong with her eyes. Not the color. The focus. They didn't reflect the flashlight beam the way eyes should. They looked flat. Painted, she stood up, very slowly. Like her joints didn't hurt at all. The dress hung perfectly on her body. No wrinkles, no funeral creases. It looked freshly pressed. She smoothed it with her hands in a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. And then she stepped toward me. I took another step back. "She matched me, buddy," she said. And the nickname sounded less like affection now and more like ownership. "You left me. So I came with you." Cold ran down my spine. I turned my flashlight beam toward the ground in front of her without meaning to, like I expected to see feet. Some proof of normal. And I did see her shoes, still clean, still polished, and beneath them, no shadow. Not even a faint one. I snapped my light back up to her face, heart hammering. "Who are you?" I whispered. She smiled again, but it wasn't her smile. It was a copy of her smile, like someone had practiced it. "I'm your Nana," she said. "Now come. Take me home." The words landed in my bones. Because they were wrong. She never would have asked that. My grandmother hated being a burden. Even when she was sick, she tried to carry her own grocery bags. I clenched the radio so hard, my hand hurt. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said, but my voice shook so much it sounded like a lie. Her smile vanished. "No," she said, and her voice dropped into something flat at the same moment. My radio erupted with static so loud I flinched. Then her voice came through, clear and close, like she was speaking directly into my ear. "Buddy, don't." My thumb pressed the push-to-talk button by accident. "Paul," I blurted. "You on the channel. Say something." Silence. The woman took another step toward me. The cemetery seemed to press in headstones, trees, the dark beyond the fence. My flashlight beam trembled, and then, in the distance, I heard something that snapped me out of it. A car door, a human sound, metal, real headlights. Swept across the road outside the cemetery. Someone was pulling up to the gate. I turned, relief flooding me so hard my knees went weak. A pickup stopped on the shoulder, and a man got out. He had a cap on. He shone his own flashlight toward the cemetery. "Hey!" he shouted. "Everything okay in there?" My voice stuck in my throat. I tried to answer, but no sound came. I turned back toward the bench. She was gone. Not walking away. Not hiding behind a headstone. Gone like someone had erased her. From the scene, the bench sat empty in the flashlight beam. The air felt suddenly colder. And the quiet was so deep it made my ears ring. The man outside the gate stepped closer. "Sir?" he called again. "You all right?" I stumbled toward the gate like I was drunk. My boots caught on the uneven ground. My radio crackled with a soft, almost amused sound. A whisper, "Buddy." I forced myself through the gate and onto the road. The man lowered his flashlight, seeing my face. "You look like you saw a damn ghost," he said, half joking, but his voice turned serious fast. "I'm headed home from my cousin's place. I saw your light in here and thought maybe someone was messing around." I swallowed hard. I started. My radio crackled again, louder this time. And the man's eyes flicked to it. A woman's voice came through. Distorted but unmistakable. "Tell him to leave," it said. The man's face changed. All the humor drained out. "What the hell?" he muttered. "That your dispatch?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at the radio like it was a mouth. The man took a step back instinctively. "Sir," he said carefully, "you okay? You want me to call someone?" I managed to nod. "Yes," I rasped. Call the sheriff." He pulled his phone out, but as he did, my radio burst into static again. Then her voice, clear as day, came through with a tone so familiar it punched tears into my eyes. "Buddy," it said, almost gentle again. "Come back." My knees buckled. I grabbed the fence post to steady myself. The man stared at me like I was about to collapse. Hey, he said, reaching out, but he didn't touch me. Like he wasn't sure if I was contagious. I shook my head hard, trying to clear it. "Don't go in," I whispered. "Just don't." He didn't argue. He dialed, speaking to someone on the line in a low, urgent voice. I caught words like security guard, cemetery, radio, woman's voice, and something's not right. His eyes kept darting past me toward the cemetery gate like he expected to see someone step out. Nothing. Stepped out, but the radio kept whispering, "Buddy, buddy." After the man finished the call, he stayed with me on the shoulder of the road, keeping a cautious distance. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? Every time the radio crackled, he flinched. After a while, he asked, "Is that your wife messing with you or something?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so impossible. "No," I said. "My grandmother died this week." He went quiet after that. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later. His cruiser lights painted the cemetery gate red and blue. He got out, hand resting near his belt, and approached us. "Evening," he said, then corrected himself. "Morning, I guess." "What's going on?" The man who'd stopped explained, stumbling over the words, sounding ridiculous even to himself. I could tell he wanted the deputy to laugh so he could laugh too and make it all nothing. But the deputy didn't laugh. He looked at me. "You the guard?" I nodded. "What did you see?" I opened my mouth and my throat locked. Because the moment I tried to say it out loud, it became insane. A dead woman on a bench. My grandmother calling me buddy. A radio transmitting her voice. The deputy watched me, and maybe he saw something in my face because he didn't push hard. He just nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's take a look." He walked to the cemetery gate. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My boots felt rooted to the asphalt. The deputy shone his light inside, sweeping over the bench, the lane, the first rows of stones. Nothing. "See anyone?" He called over his shoulder. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. The deputy stepped just inside the gate, crunching gravel, then paused like he'd remembered something. He tapped the radio clipped to my vest. "That thing yours?" "Yes," I said. He leaned closer. "You've got another channel on there? Maybe someone's bleeding in from a nearby frequency." "I don't know," I whispered, as if answering. The radio crackled. Her voice came through, soft and delighted. "Buddy." The deputy froze. The beam of his flashlight stopped moving. He looked at the radio. Then at me. The man who'd stopped let out a sound like a choked curse. The deputy's jaw tightened. He pressed the push-to-talk on my radio. "This is Deputy Harlan," he said clearly. "Identify yourself." Static then, in a tone that made my blood turn to ice. Her voice replied, not sweet, not grandmotherly. "He's mine." The deputy's face went pale. He didn't say another word into the radio. He backed out of the cemetery gate without taking his eyes off the darkness beyond the bench. Then he turned and looked at me like I wasn't just a tired security guard anymore, but a problem he didn't have training for. "Where's her grave?" he asked quietly. My mouth trembled. "What?" "Your grandmother," he said. "Where'd you bury her?" I pointed down the lane, deeper into the cemetery. "Back row," I said, "near the cedar line." The deputy nodded once, tight. "We're not going to go in there tonight," he said, like he was making the decision for all of us. "You hear me? We're leaving." My pride wanted to argue. My fear was already moving. We got in our vehicles. The deputy followed behind as I drove back to the lot, my hands shaking on the wheel. The man who'd stopped peeled off and drove away without a wave. I don't blame him. If I'd been him, I'd have fled to Dot back at the security yard. The deputy parked for a minute beside my truck and spoke through the window. "You've got somewhere you can go tonight?" he asked. "I've got a trailer," I said, 2 miles out. "Go there," he said. "Lock your doors. Don't answer if you hear someone outside." Something twisted inside me. "You believe me?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. The deputy stared past me. Toward the road, toward the cemetery that wasn't even visible from here, but felt like it had moved closer. "I believe your radio did something it shouldn't," he said. "And I believe you look like you've been through hell." Then he added, quieter, "And I've worked this county long enough to know there are places you don't go after midnight." He left after that. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the radio clipped to my vest. The little green light on it blinked calmly, like nothing was wrong. I unhooked it, placed it on the passenger seat, and stared at it like it might bite. It didn't crackle again. Not then. I drove home in silence, every shadow on the road looking like a person waiting. When I got to my trailer, I checked the locks twice, then sat in the dark living room with a lamp on and the radio sitting on the coffee table like a cursed object. I told myself it was grief, shock, exhaustion, a weird coincidence with frequencies, anything but. At around 3 in the morning, the radio crackled and my grandmother's voice, sweet again, familiar again, whispered from the speaker like she was lying in bed beside me. "Buddy," it said, "you promised me the weekend. I don't remember sliding off the couch. I don't remember my knees hitting the floor. I just remember crying so hard my chest hurt, whispering back like an idiot, 'I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.'" After that night, things got worse in small ways. The radio would crackle at random, always when I was alone. Sometimes it was her voice telling childhood stories, but the details were slightly wrong, names mixed up. Places off by a mile, like someone had studied my life but didn't quite understand it. Sometimes it wasn't her voice at all. Sometimes it was that flat tone that had said, "He's mine." I stopped wearing the radio. My supervisor got mad. I didn't care. I started taking extra coffee breaks, extra smoke breaks, anything to avoid silence. Then, on the 4th night after the funeral, I lost time. I remember arriving at work. I remember checking the gate. I remember looking toward the cemetery and feeling that pull again, like gravity, and then there's a blank. The next thing I know, the sky is turning gray, birds starting to chirp, and I'm sitting on damp grass with my back against a headstone. My legs were stiff like I'd been there for hours. My throat was raw. My hands were muddy up to the wrists. I blinked hard, confused, and looked at the headstone beside me. my grandmother's name. I was sitting at her grave like a child at the edge of a bed. My radio lay in the grass near my knee. Turned on, the volume turned low. When it crackled, I flinched. Her voice whispered, satisfied. "Good," it said. "That's better." I stumbled to my feet and staggered back toward the road like I was escaping a fire. My boots left prints in the wet grass. My hands shook so hard I could barely unlock my truck. When I got back to the lot, my coworker Paul was there, his shift starting early. He looked at me and went pale. "Dude," he said, "where the hell have you been?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He pointed past me. "I drove by the cemetery on the way in," he said slowly. "I saw your truck parked crooked by the gate. I thought you were checking something." I stared at him. "And then I saw you," he continued, voice dropping, "sitting by a grave, talking like someone was sitting with you." My stomach turned. What was I saying? I whispered. Paul's face tightened. "You kept saying, 'I'm here, Nana. I'm here. Don't be lonely,' over and over." A cold wave washed over me so strong I had to grip the truck bed to stay upright. Paul swallowed. "I called your name," he said. "You didn't look at me. You nodded like someone was answering you, like you were listening." He shook his head fast. "Man, I'm not messing with you." That was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. I quit that morning. I didn't even go to the office. I left my vest and radio on the supervisor's desk and walked out. The supervisor called me later, angry, then concerned, then annoyed again when I wouldn't explain. For weeks after, I refused to go near that cemetery. My mother asked why I wouldn't visit Nana's grave with her. I lied. I said work was busy. I said I couldn't handle it emotionally. That part was true. I couldn't handle it. Because sometimes at night, even after I'd turned my own phone off and unplugged the landline like a paranoid man, I would hear a faint crackle from somewhere in the house. Not loud, just enough to make you doubt yourself. And then, soft as breath against the door, that voice would come, using the nickname that belonged to my childhood like a hook. "Buddy," it would whisper, "open up. I don't sleep in my bedroom anymore. I sleep on the couch with the lights on, like a man waiting for an intruder. I tell myself it's just grief, just nerves. But here's the part I can't explain away. Last month, years after all of it, I drove past that cemetery at dusk on the way to my mother's place. I hadn't meant to. I took a wrong turn because I was tired, because old habits don't die easy. As I passed the gate, I glanced over without thinking. And there, on the bench inside the entrance, was an elderly woman sitting upright, hands folded, waiting. She wasn't looking at the road. She was looking straight at me. And even through the glass, even at that distance, I could see her mouth move like she was speaking a word I already knew. A word that still makes my skin go cold. Buddy? I didn't start going to the cemetery because I'm the kind of son who lights candles and talks to stone. I started going because my life had collapsed into a quiet apartment that still smelled like the woman who left me. And the only place that felt honest was the one place no one expected me to perform. My divorce finalized in late March. The judge's voice was calm, a T, like he was reading weather. Irreconcilable differences. My ex-wife didn't look at me once. When it was over, I walked out into a parking lot full of spring sun and felt absolutely nothing until I opened my car door and saw the little plastic rosary hanging from the mirror. It was my mother's. She'd put it there years ago, after my first accident, and it had never moved. That afternoon, I drove out to Maple Haven Memorial Park. Maple Haven sits in a suburban pocket between neighborhoods that all look like someone copied and pasted them tan siding. Trimmed hedges, basketball hoops over garages. The cemetery itself is older than everything around it, a rectangle of green hemmed in by tall oaks and a thin belt of pines. You can hear traffic if you listen, but the trees swallow most of it. There's a faint, constant hush, like the world is holding its breath. My mother is buried near the back, where the ground dips slightly and the shade stays longer. She chose it herself years before she got sick, when she could still walk without resting. "I want trees," she'd said. "I don't want to bake in the sun." I parked, took the little grocery store bouquet I'd grabbed on impulse, and walked the familiar path between stones. The grass was damp and soft. The air smelled like mulch and something sweet new blossoms, mixed with old earth. Her headstone is simple. Name, dates, a small carved cross. No poetry. That was her. Practical. She would have hated anything that tried too hard. I knelt, brushed a few leaves away, and set the flowers down. I didn't talk. I just sat there with my hands in my jacket pockets, staring at her name like it was a lock I could pick if I tried hard enough. That's when I noticed her. At first, I thought it was another visitor, an older woman maybe. The way she stood so still, like she didn't want to disturb anything. She was about 30 yards away, near the tree line, close enough that I could see the shape of her coat, but not the details. Dark coat, light hair. She faced my mother's grave, not me. What struck me was how motionless she was. People shift. They breathe. They scratch their arm or adjust their bag or look around. She stood as if she'd been placed there. I stared for longer than I meant to, waiting for her to move and make it normal. When she didn't, I looked away and told myself the divorce had made me jumpy. The brain searches for meaning when it's starving. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back. She was still there, facing the headstone. And her face was hidden, either turned slightly down or blocked by the angle of her hair. It wasn't dramatic. It was just inconvenient. Like she didn't want to be recognized. I walked toward my car faster than I needed to. Halfway up the path, I turned again. She was gone. No footsteps. No sound of someone walking through grass. No movement behind the trees. Just empty shade and a stretch of green that looked untouched. I sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Then I drove home, telling myself I'd imagined her leaving because I hadn't actually watched her the whole time. Over the next week, I found myself thinking about that stillness at odd moments, standing in line at a pharmacy, washing a plate, trying to sleep. My mother used to say that grief makes you notice patterns that aren't there. Your mind doesn't like loose ends, she'd say. It ties knots. So the next Sunday, I went back. I told myself it was because the flowers were already dying, that I wanted to tidy the little plot, that it was normal. The sky was gray and low, the kind of overcast that makes everything look flat. The cemetery was mostly empty. A groundskeeper in a neon vest rode a small mower near the front, far enough away that it was just a faint hum. I walked to my mother's grave and stopped. The woman was there again. This time, she stood closer, maybe 20 yards. Same dark coat, same pale hair. And again, she faced my mother's headstone as if she were reading it. Except she didn't lean in, didn't shift, didn't do anything a person does when they're actually reading. Her face was still hidden. I felt a sharp irritation, sudden and childish. Like someone had followed me into a room I thought was private. "Excuse me?" I called out, my voice louder than I expected in the quiet. She didn't react. No head turn, no flinch. I waited a beat, then tried again. "Can I help you?" Nothing. I took a few steps toward her, and the air changed. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way to explain it. It wasn't colder. It wasn't hotter. It was like stepping into a patch of atmosphere that didn't belong to the same day. My mouth went dry at that moment. She turned slightly, not toward me, but enough that her profile should have come into view, except her hair slid in a way that still covered her face. Too perfect, too deliberate. Like a curtain being drawn by an invisible hand. I stopped. My heart felt like it had found a new rhythm, too fast to be mine. Do you know her? I asked, softer now, nodding toward the headstone. Like that made the question polite. That was when she tilted her head. Not like someone considering a question, but like an animal hearing its sound. And then she began to turn slowly, carefully, as if she had all the time in the world and wanted me to watch every inch of it. When her face finally came into view, my brain refused it, because it was my mother, not an older woman who resembled her, not someone with the same haircut and similar cheekbones. It was the exact face I had known my entire life, the shape of her jaw, the slight bump on the bridge of her nose from when she'd been hit by a softball as a teenager, the faint scar near her eyebrow that she used to cover with makeup when she was younger and later stopped bothering with. I knew that face like I knew my own hands, but it was wrong. Her eyes were open, but there was no expression behind them. No recognition, no warmth. The skin had the same tone, the same tiny lines around the mouth, but it looked like a mask stretched over something that didn't understand what it was wearing, and she wasn't breathing. I don't mean she was holding her breath. I mean her chest did not rise. Not once. We stood like that meat, frozen in the grass. Her facing me with my mother's face while the mower hummed somewhere far away. The sound so normal, it made me feel insane. I tried to speak, to say her name, to do something that would turn it back into a misunderstanding. Nothing came out. She stared at me with those flat eyes. No blink, no twitch, no visible emotion. Then, without breaking eye contact, she lifted one hand. Her fingers were pale and clean. No dirt, no tremor. The hand moved like it belonged to someone practicing a gesture they'd seen in a movie. She pointed not at me, but over my shoulder, toward my mother's grave. The gesture was small, precise, like, here. My stomach rolled. I turned, slow as if speed might shatter something, and looked at the headstone. The flowers I'd brought last week were gone. I knew they'd be dead now, but the stems weren't there either. The little vase I'd set them in was empty, turned slightly as if someone had moved it. There were fresh footprints in the damp grass beside the stone. Small, neat impressions like shoes that didn't carry weight the way mine did. Like a person who walked without sinking in. I spun back. She was standing closer now. Not walking closer. Standing closer. She hadn't moved her feet. She hadn't passed through the space between us. She was simply nearer than she had been. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. "What do you want?" I finally managed, my voice cracked and thin. She didn't answer. She only watched. Wearing my mother's face like an insult, I backed away. My heel caught a slight rise in the ground, and I stumbled. And in that instant, when my eyes broke from hers for half a second, felt something brush past me. Not a hand, not a shoulder, a presence. A slip of pressure, like walking through a spiderweb you can't see. I snapped my head up. She was gone. The space where she'd been standing was empty grass and shade. The trees behind it were still. No leaves rustled. No branches moved. Nothing ran away. I stood there until my legs started shaking, and then I walked fast, almost running back to my car. The whole time I expected to hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace. I didn't, but I felt watched. That night, I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell who wouldn't either laugh nervously or look at me with that careful concern reserved for people who might be slipping. I tried to make sense of it with logic. Maybe someone had followed me. Maybe it was some sick prank. Maybe grief had finally flipped a switch in my head. But every explanation fell apart the moment I pictured her eyes not angry, not sad, not hungry, just blank, like a doll's. The next day at work, I caught myself staring at reflections in the dark glass of a conference room, in the chrome of a coffee machine, in the black screen of my phone when it went idle. I kept expecting to see that face behind me, perfectly still. I didn't, for a few days. I almost convinced myself it had been a stress hallucination, divorce, sleep deprivation, grief that had backed up inside me like clogged plumbing, the mind tying knots. Then my phone rang on Thursday evening with a number I didn't recognize. I answered, mostly out of boredom, silence on the line. I waited. Hello? A faint sound like breath, but not through a mouth. More like air moving through fabric. Who is this? I asked. No response. Just that faint, soft sound, steady and patient. I hung up and stared at my phone, angry at myself for feeling afraid of a blank call. A minute later, my phone rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. I let it ring out. When it stopped, a voicemail icon appeared. I don't know why I listened. Some part of me thought I'd hear a scammer, a wrong number, something that would make me feel ridiculous. The voicemail was 8 seconds long. It was silent till the last 2 seconds. When I heard a small sound, a slow inhale, and then, very faint, the dry click of a tongue against teeth. My mother used to make that sound when she was thinking. I deleted the voicemail and blocked the number. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the phone on my couch. That night, I dreamed of the cemetery. I was standing at my mother's grave, and the headstone was blank, the letters erased. Behind me, someone was breathing softly, too close to my ear. When I turned, it wasn't my mother's face anymore. It was mine. I woke up with my heart hammering and my sheets damp. I didn't go back to the cemetery after that. I told myself the healthy thing was to stop, to grieve in a way that didn't involve chasing shadows through wet grass, to let the dead be dead. For a while, avoiding it seemed to work. My days filled with the small, bleak rituals of rebuilding laundry. Bills, work, dinner, eaten, standing up over the sink. I started sleeping a little better. The tightness in my chest eased. The world became less sharp around the edges, and then I saw her in my bathroom mirror. It was a Monday morning. I was shaving, half awake, steam fogging the glass. I leaned in to catch a spot under my jaw and in the mirror over my shoulder. Behind me, someone stood in the doorway, dark coat, light hair, face hidden. My blood turned to ice so fast, I felt nauseous. I whipped around. The bathroom doorway was empty. My apartment hallway was empty. No sound, no movement. I turned back to the mirror. The doorway in the reflection was empty too. For a moment, I just stood there with the razor in my hand, foam drying on my skin, trying not to breathe too loudly. I told myself it was a trick of steam and sleep. Then, as if my thought had invited it, the reflection changed. Not the room, not the doorway, my own face, just for a flicker so. Fast I wondered if I blinked and imagined it my reflection was not me, it was my mother, emotionless, wrong her. Eyes stared out of my face like they belonged to a thing looking through a window. The razor slipped. I nicked my chin. A thin line of blood appeared, bright and real. When I blinked, it was me again. My own startled eyes, my own mouth slightly open, but my hands were trembling, and I could still feel the afterimage of her face like pressure behind my eyes. After that, it escalated in little ways that were impossible to prove and impossible to ignore. A reflection in my turned-off TV that held an extra shape for half a second too long. A face in the dark window of my microwave when the kitchen light was off, my mother's, watching, blank. A glimpse in the glass door of my building's lobby late at night when I came home. Standing behind my shoulder where no one stood when I turned. Always silent, always still, always just out of reach, like something learning the boundaries of my life. I stopped looking in mirrors. I started showering with my eyes closed as much as I could. I turned my phone face down so I wouldn't catch my own reflection in the black screen. I kept lights on because darkness made glass into a trap. I told myself I needed help. I Googled therapists. I hovered over appointment forms. But what do you even say? Hi, I'm recently divorced and I think something stole my dead mother's face and is haunting me through reflections. So, I did what people do when they're scared and ashamed. I tried to outrun it with routine. Work, gym, grocery store. Back home. Repeat. For a couple of weeks, the sightings became less frequent. I started to feel foolish. Maybe my brain had finally tired of the knot it was tying then. One night, I came home to find my front door unlocked. I know I locked it. I'm the kind of person who checks twice. I stood there in the hallway of my building with my key in my hand, staring at the slightly open door like it was a mouth. I pushed it open slowly. My apartment was quiet, dark, except for the glow of the streetlight filtering through blinds. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken locks. No missing items, but the air inside felt used. Like someone had been there long enough to leave an imprint. I flicked on the light and walked through each room, checking corners like I'd seen in movies, hating myself for how ridiculous it felt. Everything was normal until I reached my bedroom at the foot of my bed. Perfectly centered on the carpet was the plastic rosary from my car mirror. It should have been in my car. It always was. I hadn't touched it in years. It lay there in a neat oval, as if it had been arranged carefully. I picked it up. The beads were cold, colder than the room. When I lifted it, the little cross swung and tapped gently against my fingers. A tiny click. That same dry click from the voicemail. Tongue against teeth. I froze. The sound didn't come from the rosary. It came from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly. The far corner of my bedroom was darker than it should have been, like the light didn't reach it properly. And in that darkness, just where the wall met the closet door, someone stood. Dark coat, light hair, face hidden. I couldn't move. My muscles felt unplugged from my brain. The figure didn't step forward. She didn't raise a hand. She only tilted her head, the way she had in the cemetery, and then very slowly she lifted her face. My mother's face looked back at me. EMOTIONLESS. Wrong, her lips were closed. But I could tell she was making that sound again, not with words, but with intention, like a person miming speech without understanding language. Click, soft inhale. My stomach cramped. Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not from sadness, but from pure animal terror. Please, I whispered. Please stop. Eyes didn't change. They didn't soften. They didn't sharpen, but her mouth moved, not speaking, just forming the shape of a word. My name. I knew it the way you know a song you heard as a child. The shape was unmistakable. No sound came out. She took one step forward. This time, I saw her foot move. I saw the carpet compress, and still, the way she moved wasn't human. It was too smooth, like a puppet pulled by a string. I stumbled backward and hit my dresser. My hand slapped against the lamp, knocking it sideways. The bulb flickered. When the light steadied, she was gone. Just empty corner, closet door, hanging shirts visible through the crack. I stood there for a long time, breathing too fast. Rosary clenched in my fist so hard the beads cut into my skin. I didn't sleep in my bedroom that night. I didn't sleep much at all. I sat on my couch with the TV on, low volume, lights on. Every reflective surface covered with towels and shirts, like I was trying to keep the world from seeing me in the early hours before dawn. I got up to use the bathroom and caught myself in the dark window above my sink. I hadn't covered that one in the glass. My own face stared back at me, pale, exhausted, eyes rimmed red. And behind me, in the reflection, she stood in my kitchen, my mother's face blank and patient, watching as if she'd been there the whole time. I didn't turn around. I COULD in single quotes, because some part of me already knew the worst part. It didn't matter whether I looked. It didn't matter whether I ran. Didn't matter whether I stopped visiting the grave or never went again. Something had learned the shape of my mother in that quiet place under the trees. And by giving it my attention, by standing there, and asking it what it wanted, I had done the only thing it needed. I had acknowledged it, and now it didn't need the cemetery anymore. Now it had me. I hadn't been back to Pine Ridge Cemetery since the day we buried my brother. And even then, I only stayed long enough to help carry the box and make sure my mother didn't collapse in the mud. That sounds cold when I write it out, but cold was kind of the theme between me and Dylan for the last few years of his life. We weren't enemies. We weren't strangers. We were something worse, brothers who knew exactly how to hurt each other and did it with a lazy, practiced aim. I work, construction framing, drywall, whatever keeps the checks coming. I'm the guy who shows up before the sun, drinks burnt gas station coffee, and goes home with dust in my teeth. Dylan was the funny one when we were kids. It's the one who could make our dad laugh, even on his worst nights. He stayed in town, worked odd jobs, bounced between girlfriends, and somehow always looked like he'd just walked out of a bar even when he'd been sober for weeks. The last time I saw him alive was in my driveway. He was standing next to his truck, shoulders hunched, like he was bracing for a punch. I remember the way his hands kept opening and closing, like he couldn't decide whether to ask for something or fight me for it. I remember thinking he looked older than I expected. He said, "I need help," and I said, again. There was a pause after that, a pause long enough for me to hear my own blood in my ears. He looked past me into the garage like he was searching for our father's shadow, even though Dad had been dead for 3 years. "Just don't do this," he said. "Not today." I told him I didn't have time for his problems. I told him I had a shift. I told him he was a grown man. I told him plenty of things. Most of them were true in the way a hammer is true heavy, useful, and not at all gentle. He left without yelling. That's what haunts me. If he'd screamed, if he'd thrown something, if he'd hit me, it would have felt like the normal kind of ugly between brothers. But he just got back in his truck, shut the door, and sat there for a second with his forehead on the steering wheel like he was praying. Then he drove away. 2 weeks later, he was dead. They said it was an accident, a bad mix, a slip, the kind of thing people say when they don't want to say the other words out loud at the funeral. I stood behind my mother while she clutched the front of her dress so hard her knuckles turned white. People came up and hugged her and told her Dylan was at peace. I wanted to spit. Dylan never had peace a day in his life, not inside his skin. I didn't cry, not then, not later. I went back to work. I did what I always do when things get too big. I kept moving, so I didn't have to feel the weight of it. But guilt is patient. It doesn't need you to invite it in. It just waits until you're alone, till you've got your hands busy and your mind free enough for it to slide a knife between your ribs. It started small. A flash of Dylan's face in the rearview mirror when I turned my head too fast. His laugh in a crowded diner when someone in the corner said something funny. A smell cigarettes and cheap Kalena would hit me in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then the dreams came. In the dreams, to be standing in my driveway again. And Dylan would be next to his truck looking like he did that day, tired, bruised around the eyes, holding himself together by willpower. He'd say, "I need help," and I'd open my mouth to answer, but no sound would come out. The dream would end with him driving away while I stood frozen, choking on words that didn't exist. After the 4th night in a row, I woke up with sweat soaking the pillowcase and the taste of metal in my mouth, like I'd been biting my tongue. I decided I was done running. I told myself I just needed to go to the cemetery. Say what I should have said, and then the nightmares would stop. Like an apology is a wrench you can turn and tighten everything back into place. I picked a day off Wednesday because the job site was shut down for weather. The sky had been the color of old steel since morning, and by noon the wind was yanking branches like it was angry at the trees for standing up by the time. I pulled into the cemetery's gravel lot. It was raining hard enough to blur the world into smears. Pine Ridge sits out past town, where the roads get narrow and the fields spread out and the cell service dies. There aren't streetlights out there. At night, it's just darkness and whatever your headlights can carve out of it. The cemetery gates were open. They're those old black wrought iron ones with points at the top, the kind that look dramatic in movies and feel stupid in real life because they don't stop anyone. I drove through and parked near a row of pines that swayed and hissed like they were speaking to each other. I sat for a minute with the engine running, watching rain hammer the windshield. The wipers couldn't keep up. I could have turned around right there, told myself I tried, and gone home. Instead, I killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional crack of thunder that made the air vibrate. I grabbed the hood of my sweatshirt and pulled it up. The moment I opened the door, the wind slapped me with a sheet of cold water. My boots sank into the soft ground as soon as I stepped off the gravel. I walked with my head down, following the familiar path like my feet remembered it even if my mind didn't want to. The cemetery is older than the town. Some headstones are so weathered you can't read the names. Some of the newer ones have shiny granite photos etched into the surface. Flowers in plastic vases that never rot. Dylan's grave was in the newer section. They'd put him near our dad, because that's what you do, stack the family in the ground like you're trying to keep them close. The stone was simple. His name, his dates. Nothing about what he was like, nothing about the way his laugh could fill a room. The rain ran down the face of the stone in streaks, making the letters look like they were bleeding. I stood there, soaked through, and stared at his name until my eyes burned. "I'm sorry," I said out loud. My voice sounded small and stupid against the storm. Like the cemetery didn't care. Like Dylan didn't care. I tried again, louder. "I'm sorry, man." Thunder rolled overhead, long and low. Somewhere in the trees, something creaked, branch rubbing branch, or something heavier shifting in the wind. I swallowed hard. "I should have helped you." I should have. The words stuck. Not because I didn't have them, because saying them felt like stepping into a pit I couldn't climb out of. I took a breath and forced it. I should have listened. Rain ran off my nose and into my mouth. It tasted like dirt. I was mad, I said. I was tired. I laughed once, bitter and sharp. I was me, and you were you. And we did what we always did. I leaned forward until my forehead touched the wet stone. It was cold, and the cold shocked something open inside me. "I didn't mean it," I whispered. "I didn't mean any of it." That's when I heard the laughter. At first, I thought it was thunder, a strange crack, the kind that echoes and makes you jump. But it had a rhythm to it, a little hitch at the end. Dylan had a laugh that wasn't pretty. It wasn't polite. It came out of him like he couldn't stop it once it started. Even when he was mad, even when he was drunk, even when he was hurting. That laugh could show up like an unwanted guest. The sound came from behind the headstone. I froze so hard my teeth clicked. The cemetery around me blurred for a second, like my brain refused to accept what my ears had just caught. Then it came again, shorter this time, like someone trying not to laugh too loud. I lifted my head slowly. Water dripped off my hood. My hands were shaking, and I told myself it was the cold. Dylan, I said, and the name felt wrong in my mouth. Too familiar for a place like this. Another laugh. Closer, definitely behind the stone. I stepped to the side and looked. There was nothing there, just wet grass, mud, and a few crooked flowers someone had stuck in the ground. No footprints except mine. No shadow. No person. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear my heart punching against my ribs. I could hear rain hitting leaves like 1,000 tiny fingers. You're messing with me? I said, because the alternative was insanity. A voice answered, low and warm and unmistakable. Messing with you? It said, and it was Dylan's voice, not a memory. Not my mind doing impressions. Dylan, the sound slid under my skin like oil. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the rows, the path, the trees. Where are you? I demanded like I had the right to demand anything. Behind the stone, the voice chuckled. Right here, same place you left me. I stared at the headstone again, at his name. My throat went dry. That's not funny, I said. It's hilarious, the voice said. You finally show up. Took you long enough. I backed up until my heel hit a sunken spot and I almost went down. I caught myself, palms out like I could push the air away. This isn't I started. It is, Dylan said. The laugh died and the voice sharpened. You came to say goodbye, right? Yes, I said automatically. Yes, I so say it, he snapped. Say goodbye. Say you're done. Say you get to walk away. Lightning flashed, bleaching the cemetery white for a split second. In that flash, I could have sworn I saw movement behind the stone, a shape crouched low. Like someone hiding, then the darkness returned, and there was only rain. I'm trying, I said, and I hated how thin my voice sounded. I came here too to feel better, Dylan said. To wash your hands. To put it all down and go back to your little life. I don't have a little life, I said, anger flaring because fear always turns into anger in me. I work my ass off. You left me, Dylan said, and the words cracked like a whip. You left me when I asked you for help. You left me alone. The storm seemed to lean in closer, like it wanted to hear my answer. I didn't know, I whispered. You didn't want to know, he said. That's the difference. I shook my head hard, rain flying. I came here to apologize. Good, Dylan said softly, and stay. The word hit me like a shove. Stay, I repeated. Stay longer, Dylan said. You owe me time. You owe me more than a quick sorry in the rain. I can't, I said, and I took a step back. My legs were already moving toward the path without my permission. I have to go. The laughter came again, not funny now. Mean, you always have to go, Dylan said. That's your thing. I turned and started walking faster. The path was slick, and my boots slid in the mud. The wind shoved at my back like hands. Don't leave, Dylan called. I didn't answer. I just walked. The first wrong thing was that the path didn't end where it should have. I've been to that grave twice. Once for the funeral. Once weeks later, when I brought my mother flowers and left them there because I couldn't face her eyes. I know the layout. There's a straight path that leads back to the gate, passing a big oak with a split trunk. Then the stone angel statue near the main road. I walked until my calves burned, till my breath came out in harsh white bursts, until my clothes clung to me like wet rags. And then I saw Dylan's headstone again. Same simple granite. Same letters. Same muddy flowers. I stopped so abruptly, I almost fell forward. No, I said, and the word came out like a sob. No, no, no. Behind the stone, Dylan laughed like he was delighted. Back already, he said. Told you. To walk away that easy. I spun around, panicking, trying to find some landmark. Everything looked the same: rows of stones, gray sky, thrashing trees. The rain made distance hard to judge, turning the world into a narrow tunnel around me. I just walked. I started. You walked in circles, Dylan said. That's what you do. You go around and around until you're right back where you started. My stomach flipped. I swallowed bile. This isn't real. Oh, it's real, Dylan said, and his voice sounded closer now, like he was right behind my ear. You're here with me, where you should have been. I jerked away and stumbled. My foot hit something and I looked down, expecting a root or a stone. It was a shovel, an old shovel, half buried in mud, handle slick and dark, like someone had left it there for a reason. I stared at it and my pulse hammered. I remembered the other outline I'd heard at funerals and in whispered stories. The ones where the dead ask you to dig. I'm not doing that, I said, loud, like the cemetery could hear my refusal. Dylan sighed. A sound full of disappointment. Of course not. You never do the hard part. You just show up after and act like you were there. I came, I said, through clenched teeth. I'm here right now, are you? Dylan asked. Lightning flashed again. In that brief white blast, I saw it clearly this time. Behind the headstone was a shape, crouched low, shoulders too narrow, head tilted at an angle that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a full body, was more like a suggestion of one something, wearing the idea of Dylan the way a kid wears a Halloween mask. Then the light was gone, and the shape vanished into shadow. I screamed. It tore out of me before I could stop it, raw and animal. Now you're honest, Dylan said, pleased. Now you're acting like you mean it. I ran. I didn't follow the path. I cut between rows, splashing through puddles, slipping on wet grass. I aimed for what I thought was the gate toward, the darker line of trees where the entrance should be. The cemetery seemed to stretch. Each row I crossed revealed another row beyond it. Headstones blurred past, names I didn't read, lives I didn't know behind me. Dylan's laughter rolled through the storm like it was everywhere at once. I saw the gate, finally, black iron teeth against the gray sky. Relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. I reached it and grabbed the bars with both hands. They didn't move. The gate was chained. A heavy chain wrapped through the iron, padlocked tight. The lock was new, shiny even in the rain. My mouth went dry again. I yanked harder, rattling the metal until my arms shook. The chain held. This is insane, I shouted. It was open when I came in. Dylan's voice drifted from behind me, amused. Was it? I didn't want to turn around. Every cell in my body screamed not to. But I did anyway, because some part of me still expected to see my brother standing there, grinning, like it was a prank he'd planned. The path behind me was empty. Only rain and headstones and the trees, bowing in the wind like they were nodding. I fumbled for my phone with numb hands. The screen was wet and the touch didn't register at first. When it finally lit up, there were no bars, no service. Just the time in the corner, 1:47. I stared at it like it might explain something. You can't call anyone. Dylan said softly, it's just you and me. I backed away from the gate, shaking my head, breath coming too fast. A lie. I'm leaving. I said, like saying it would make it true. You already left, Dylan said, and there was no laughter now, just something hollow. You left a long time ago. I turned and ran again, picking a direction at random, not caring where it led. As long as it wasn't back to that grave. After what felt like forever, I slowed, chest heaving, legs trembling. The rain had soaked through everything. My hands were stiff. My jaw ached from clenching it. I stopped near a section of older graves where the stones leaned like tired men. The wind was stronger here, whipping through the open space. I tried to orient myself, find the oak with the split trunk, find the angel statue. Anything. I saw a stone angel up ahead, and my heart jumped. I ran toward it, nearly slipping, and reached it only to realize it wasn't the angel statue near the main road. It was a different one, smaller, broken at the wings. My stomach sank. Panic tightened until I could barely breathe. Behind me, Dylan chuckled. "You're lost." "I'm not." I lied. "You are," he said. "And you're going to get tired. You're going to sit down. You're going to stop running. And then you'll listen." I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to think, trying to force logic into the storm. I walked in here. I parked my truck. That was real. My truck is somewhere inside the cemetery. If I could find it, I could at least lock myself inside and wait for daylight. Or I didn't know what. I started moving again, slower now, because running wasn't working. I scanned for the darker shape of my vehicle between rows. At first, I saw nothing. Just more stones, more wet grass, more rain, then dash there. My truck parked near the pines, exactly where I'd left it. Relief surged through me so hard, I almost laughed. I stumbled toward it, boots dragging through mud, hands already reaching for the door handle, and then I stopped, because my truck was on the other side of the fence. Outside the cemetery, I stood there, separated by iron bars, staring through the rain at my own vehicle sitting in the gravel lot like it had never moved, like it had always been there. The gate in front of it was open, wide open. No chain. Number? Locked out. I could see the road beyond, slick and dark, disappearing into the trees. My mind hiccuped. Time felt wrong. Space felt wrong. Like I'd stepped through something without noticing. I reached out and grabbed the gate again. This time, it swung open easily, squealing on wet hinges. I stumbled through, half expecting the air to change, expecting the world to snap back into wool. Dollar Butte, entoed. Place nothing happened. I was out. I looked back into the cemetery. The rain made it hard to see, but I could make out the rows of stones, the blurred shapes of trees, the shadowed paths. "Dylan," called, my voice cracking silence. No laughter, no voice. Just the storm. I ran to my truck, yanked the door open, and fell into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine turned over, the sound was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. I slammed the locks down like that meant anything, and sat there with my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard. My phone was in my lap. The screen lit up automatically, as if it had been waiting. No missed calls, no messages. But there were bars now. It's full service. The time read 1:47. The same time as before. My throat tightened. I looked up at the cemetery through the rain. I needed proof. I needed something to tell myself this wasn't just my brain snapping under guilt and weather. Something I could hear later when I started doubting myself, so I hit record. My voice sounded ragged, like I'd been screaming. "My name is..." I stopped. My name didn't matter. Not to anyone but me. "I went to Pine Ridge Cemetery today," I said, staring at the open gate. "I went to my brother Dylan's grave to apologize. It's raining like hell out here, and I heard him. I heard his laugh. I heard his voice." My hands clenched around the phone so tight my knuckles ached. The gate wouldn't open. Every path led back to his grave. I swallowed hard. I saw something behind his headstone. A flash of lightning lit the cemetery in stark white dot. In that flash, I saw a figure standing just inside the gate. Not crouched now, standing upright, still and patient. It was roughly my height. Its shoulders were a little too narrow, its posture a little too stiff. It looked like a man trying to remember how to be a man. It raised its head, and even through the rain and distance, I knew what face it was wearing. Dylan's, but it wasn't right. The expression didn't change. The eyes didn't squint against. The rain, the mouth didn't move. It just watched me from the dark, like it was waiting for me to do what I always do. Turn away. My breath stopped. The phone kept recording, capturing only the sound of rain and my shallow, shaking inhale. The figure didn't come closer. It didn't have to, because in my head, clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat, Dylan's voice whispered, soft and amused, "Now you know where the door is." My thumb hovered over the end button. I couldn't make it press. I stared at the open gate, at the figure just inside it, at the cemetery that suddenly looked too much like a mouth. "I don't know how long I was in there," I said into the phone, barely audible. My clock never changed. "I don't know if I left at all." The figure tilted its head, just slightly, like it was listening. I ended the recording. I started the truck. I put it in reverse, and as I backed away, the figure inside the gate lifted a hand, not waving, not beckoning, just holding it up, palm out, like a promise. Not goodbye, not yet. When I turned onto the road, the trees closed in around me, and the rain swallowed everything behind. But all the way home, every time the wipers cleared the windshield for a split second, I thought I saw him in the glass, standing in the back seat, wearing Dylan's face, waiting for me to pull over. And the worst part is this: I haven't been back. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the air feels heavy, I'll hear a laugh from somewhere I can't place short, familiar, full of something that isn't humor at all. And I'll find my keys in my hand without remembering picking them up. Like some part of me is already walking back to that gate, already stepping inside, already staying longer.